Imagine this. You're at the bank, just trying to deposit a check, when the teller, without a second thought, shreds it. But here's the twist. That check wasn't just any check. It was from the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. Her son. And what happens next? It'll leave you speechless. It was an ordinary Monday morning at the local bank. The typical hustle and bustle filled the air as customers scurried around, trying to get their banking done before the week got busier. The usual clink of coins, the hum of the automatic teller machines, and the shuffle of feet were all around. On the surface, it seemed like just another regular day in a place where people came to conduct business, solve problems, and check off their to-do lists. Little did anyone know, though, that something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that would shake one woman to her core and send shockwaves throughout the community. For Sarah Thompson, a woman who had worked tirelessly her whole life to provide for her family, this seemingly ordinary day would take a turn that would change her world forever. Sarah wasn't just any mother. She was a woman who had worked her way up from humble beginnings. Having been raised in a small town, she had fought against the odds every step of the way. Whether it was working multiple jobs to keep the family afloat or going back to school later in life to earn her degree, Sarah had done it all with strength, grace, and determination. She had faced obstacles, overcome challenges, and built a life of success and stability for her two children. Her son, Jamal Thompson, had followed in her footsteps, carving out his own path to success. Jamal was no ordinary man. He had become the CEO of a successful tech company and was making waves in the business world. The company was growing rapidly, attracting investors, and receiving accolades for its innovations. And Jamal, though humble, had never forgotten where he came from. His success was a testament to the sacrifices Sarah had made for him and his sister. She had always been there for him, supporting him, guiding him, and loving him through every high and low in his life. On this particular morning, Sarah found herself standing in line at the bank. She wasn't there for anything unusual, just a simple task. She had come to deposit a check from her son, Jamal. The check wasn't just any check, though it was from her son's company. A check that would help cover some personal expenses and keep the family moving forward. For Sarah, this check was more than just money. It was a symbol of the hard work and sacrifices that had led to this moment. But as soon as Sarah handed the check to the young teller behind the counter, things took a strange and unsettling turn. The teller's face shifted, her previously warm smile turning into an icy, emotionless expression. Without so much as a glance at Sarah, the teller coldly grabbed the check and began to process it. Sarah, though a bit confused by the teller's sudden coldness, didn't think much of it at first. She had seen the occasional indifferent bank employee, but nothing that raised alarms. She simply assumed the teller was having a rough day. However, as Sarah stood waiting, watching the process unfold, something strange began to happen. The sound of the shredder hummed in the background, louder and louder, until Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. In a swift motion, the teller slid the check into the shredder. Yes, you read that right, the bank teller shredded the check. Sarah's stomach dropped. The world seemed to slow down as she stood there, stunned. She couldn't believe her eyes. It didn't make sense. How could this be happening? The check written by her son, the CEO of a successful tech company, was being destroyed. Time seemed to stop for a moment. The noise of the shredder filled the air, drowning out everything else. Sarah's heart began to race as she instinctively rushed forward to stop the machine. But it was already too late. The check was gone, reduced to strips of paper, scattered inside the machine like confetti. The air around her felt suddenly thick with tension. Her face flushed with disbelief and frustration. "Excuse me, what just happened?" Sarah finally asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and anger. The teller barely looked up, her tone dismissive as she replied, "It's a bad check, ma'am." "I'm sure it's not your fault." Sarah froze. A bad check? Her son's check? The check from a multi-million-dollar tech company that was led by her son, the CEO. This couldn't be happening. Sarah tried to process what she was hearing. She had worked so hard to raise her children, put them through school, and help them succeed. And now her son, her successful son, was being reduced to this? It didn't make sense. She pressed again. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. This check is from my son. He's the CEO of a tech company." "Are you sure this is a mistake?" The teller shrugged, clearly uninterested. "It's just a standard procedure. It doesn't matter who the check is from. It was flagged by the system." At this point, Sarah could feel the anger building inside of her. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the lack of respect. The lack of recognition for everything her family had worked for. Jamal had built his company from the ground up, and now his mother was being humiliated in a bank, dismissed as just another customer whose check didn't matter. Sarah, now shaking with fury, demanded to speak with a manager, but the damage had already been done. She wasn't just a regular customer anymore. She was a mother, and her son had been disrespected, albeit unknowingly, by a system that didn't understand who he was or what he represented. But little did Sarah know, the events that followed would reveal a much deeper truth than she could ever have imagined. The moment she thought her dignity had been taken from her, the world was about to turn in a way that would leave her and everyone else in that bank completely speechless. The moment Sarah handed over the check, the teller, a young woman in her 20s, gave her a look that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was almost as if Sarah had asked for something unreasonable, something that should not have been done in the first place. The teller didn't ask for identification. She didn't pause to examine the check closely. There was no acknowledgement of Sarah's presence beyond the cold, indifferent glance. It was as if Sarah didn't matter, as if her very identity and everything she had worked for held no value in the eyes of the young woman behind the counter. Without any hesitation, the teller slid the check into the shredder. Sarah's stomach dropped, her mind racing as the sound of the shredder filled the room. The high-pitched whirring noise seemed to echo louder than anything else, drowning out the usual sounds of the bustling bank. In that moment, everything else seemed to blur. Sarah's body went stiff. She stood frozen, her mind in a state of disbelief. She wanted to scream, she wanted to cry, but all she could do was stare at the destruction of something that represented not just her son's hard work, but everything she had fought for as a mother. Her hands began to tremble, and she felt an overwhelming sense of humiliation settle in her chest. She had been on the receiving end of judgment before, but never like this. Never in front of a room full of strangers. But the worst part was the teller's indifference. Without even a second glance, the young woman moved on to the next customer in line, as though nothing had just happened. As though shredding a check from a successful CEO was a routine, unimportant task. It was as if Sarah were invisible, her worth irrelevant. And just like that, the bank, an institution she had trusted with her life savings, had torn a piece of her dignity apart. As the next customer stepped forward, Sarah's mind was still spinning. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a mistake. But before she could make sense of the situation or demand an explanation, she heard the soft rustling sound of paper falling through the shredder, followed by the mechanical click as the machine powered down. At last she found her voice. "Excuse me, what just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky but firm. The teller barely lifted her gaze, her fingers tapping away at the keyboard as she continued her work without a shred of empathy. "It's just a bad check, ma'am. I'm sure it's not your fault." The words hit Sarah like a slap in the face. A bad check? A bad check? The words didn't make sense. This check wasn't just any check, it was a check from her son, Jamal Thompson, a man who had earned his place as a successful CEO, a man who had built an empire from the ground up. It wasn't just any check, it was a check from a company that had millions in assets, a company that was gaining national attention. And now it was shredded, destroyed, reduced to scraps of paper because of a bank teller's careless disregard. Sarah's mind raced. This had to be a mistake. She couldn't believe it. She wasn't sure whether to feel anger, sadness, or confusion. Was it her fault for being unaware of some technical glitch? Was there something wrong with the system? She knew there had to be an explanation, but the more she thought about it, the more surreal the situation became. She was starting to feel small, insignificant, and invisible in a place she had trusted for years. Before she could respond, her mind whirled, trying to piece together what had just happened when a sudden beep interrupted her thoughts. The loud, digital sound filled the room, drawing attention from the other customers. Sarah turned, only to be met by the unexpected flicker of the large flat-screen monitor above the teller's desk. The monitor, which had been displaying generic bank advertisements up until this point, suddenly came to life. The colors shifted, and then a face appeared, a face Sarah knew all too well. The screen flashed a high-definition image of Jamal Thompson, her son. Her heart skipped a beat. The room around her seemed to fall silent. Every eye in the bank turned to the screen. It felt as though the world had stopped moving, as if time itself had paused. All Sarah could do was stare at the screen in shock as her son's face beamed down from the monitor. The commercial began with Jamal smiling confidently, dressed in a tailored suit, sitting at the head of a sleek, modern conference table. He spoke briefly about his company, about innovation, growth, and his dedication to creating a better future for everyone. But it wasn't the words that caught Sarah's attention. It was the realization that the screen wasn't just showcasing some random CEO. It was showcasing her son, the very same son whose check had just been shredded by the bank. Jamal's face was unmistakable, but there was more. Below his smiling face, a line of text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Jamal Thompson, CEO, Bancorp's newest partner. Her heart began to race as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just any bank. This was the same bank that had just shredded her son's check. The same bank that had humiliated her just moments earlier. And now there he was on the screen, a partner, a key player in the very institution that had disrespected her. The air in the bank became thick with tension. The other customers began to murmur, exchanging puzzled looks. Sarah's mind struggled to make sense of what had just occurred. It wasn't just the check that had been destroyed, it was her trust in the system, her faith in the institution that had taken her hard-earned money for years. The room was silent, but in Sarah's mind, the noise was deafening. She wasn't just a mother of a CEO, she was a woman who had been let down by the very system that was supposed to honor her. The shredding of her son's check wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the systemic disregard that so many people, particularly black professionals, faced every day. And now, standing in the midst of that silence, Sarah's heart swelled with both anger and pride. She knew that the moment she'd just witnessed was the beginning of something bigger, a realization that her son, despite all his success, wasn't exempt from the prejudice and ignorance that existed in the world. But Sarah also knew that this moment of disrespect, would not define her or her family. It would fuel a fire that could not be extinguished. The image of Jamal, smiling confidently in a sharp suit, sitting behind a sleek desk, filled the flat-screen monitor. He looked every bit the successful CEO that he had become: polished, professional, and powerful. The scene was set against the backdrop of his company's headquarters, its modern glass exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Jamal spoke with calm assurance about his company's mission, about the strides they had made in technology, innovation, and business growth. He spoke of how his team worked tirelessly to provide solutions that would revolutionize the industry and create lasting impacts on the world. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she watched her son on the screen. She had been there for every step of his journey, from the struggles of his early days to the triumphs of his later successes. Her heart swelled as she saw her son leading the charge, representing everything she had worked for as a mother, everything she had hoped for him as a child. She could hardly believe this was the same boy who had once played in the backyard, dreaming big dreams with nothing but the love of a supportive mother to guide him. But just as Sarah was processing this moment, trying to absorb the full weight of the realization that her son had achieved such monumental success, something unexpected happened. The ad switched. The scene of Jamal talking about his company faded away, replaced by a close-up of his face. The camera zoomed in on his bright, confident smile. The image was so vivid, so clear, that it almost felt as though Jamal were standing right there in front of her. As the camera lingered on his face, a message appeared at the bottom of the screen. The words were simple but loaded with meaning. "Thank you for choosing Bancorp, where trust and innovation meet." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew what was coming next. But then, beneath the glowing words, something even more significant appeared. The text was brief but striking. Jamal Thompson, CEO, Bancorp's newest partner. It was like a punch to the gut. Sarah's eyes widened and her breath caught in her throat. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment as the truth washed over her with an intensity she had never expected. The bank, the very bank that had just shredded her son's check, wasn't just a place where Jamal did business. It wasn't just the institution where he was a customer. No, the truth was much bigger than that. Jamal wasn't just a customer anymore. He was now a partner in the bank. The recognition hit Sarah like a freight train. It wasn't just a simple oversight or a technical glitch. This wasn't a mistake. It was something much more profound. The teller who had so casually shredded the check had no idea who Sarah was. She hadn't known that the man who had written the check, the man whose check had just been discarded without a second thought, was her son, the newly minted partner of the very institution that had treated her with such dismissiveness. As the commercial continued, Sarah's mind raced. The realization struck her in waves, and she could hardly process it. She had stood there, humiliated, her son's hard-earned check ripped apart by a machine. while the people around her had no idea of the monumental shift that was unfolding right before their eyes. Jamal's face on that screen wasn't just a commercial. It was a stark reminder that her son had risen to a level of success that most people only dreamed of. Yet here she was, a mother, being treated as if she were invisible in the very place where he had achieved such a high level of success. In that instant, Sarah understood just how small the world really was. The irony was too heavy to ignore. The same bank that had disrespected her was the very same institution that had just elevated her son to a position of power. She couldn't help but reflect on how far Jamal had come, how much he had fought to get to this place, and how his journey had now led them both to this surreal moment. What's more, the whole world around Sarah seemed to freeze. Every person in the bank had their eyes glued to the screen. She wasn't just some anonymous customer anymore. The bank wasn't just an impersonal institution where people came to do business. It was a place that had now taken center stage. In Sarah's life, a place that had brought her face to face with the reality of her son's power. This wasn't just about money or business transactions. It was about respect, recognition, and the truth that sometimes the people who deserve it the most are the ones who are treated the least fairly. And that realization left Sarah with a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, she was filled with an immense pride for her son. He had worked so hard to get where he was, and now he was a partner in a major financial institution. It was a testament to his intelligence, his determination, and his unrelenting drive to succeed. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the sting of the disrespect she had just endured. The humiliation of being dismissed so easily, so thoughtlessly, was still fresh in her mind. She wasn't just a mother of a successful CEO. She wasn't just a proud parent. In that moment, she felt like something that was being overlooked, something that was invisible in the face of Jamal's success. But despite the pain of the moment, she knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something bigger. The world might not have known who she was, but she knew her worth. And she knew that her son's success was not just a reflection of his hard work, but of the strength, love, and resilience she had instilled in him all those years ago. As the ad ended and the screen flickered back to the bank's regular promotions, Sarah stood there, feeling both humbled and empowered. She had witnessed something she would never forget. And in that moment, she knew her son's journey was far from over. It was just beginning. And now, she would have to find a way to make sure her voice was heard. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, still reeling from the shock of what had just happened. The harsh whir of the shredder still echoed in her ears, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The surreal nature of the moment kept her on edge. The ad featuring her son, Jamal, had just ended, and the room had returned to its normal hum, but everything felt different. All eyes in the bank were on her, some out of curiosity, some in disbelief. The whole situation felt like an uncomfortable spectacle. As Sarah stood there, processing everything, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. The teller, now realizing the severity of her mistake, seemed flustered. Her earlier cold demeanor had turned to one of concern, and she quickly turned to Sarah with an apologetic expression. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Thompson," she stammered, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to," but Sarah wasn't listening to her anymore. The words didn't matter. The damage had been done. The check that had been shredded could not be restored, and the humiliation Sarah had endured in front of everyone couldn't be undone. The teller's apology felt hollow. It wasn't just the shredded check that hurt. It was the disregard she had been shown. The assumption that she wasn't important enough to be treated with respect. Sarah had worked hard for everything. She had worked hard to raise her children, to support Jamal through every challenge, and to witness his success. Yet here she was, disrespected by someone who had no clue who she was or what she represented. "I need to speak with the manager," Sarah said, her voice unwavering despite the storm of emotions she felt. There was a calmness in her that surprised even herself. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even just about the shredded check anymore. It was about something deeper, something much more personal. This was about respect, about being seen and valued for who she was and what she had worked for. The teller, realizing there was no way to undo the damage she had caused, quickly picked up the phone and called for the branch manager. Within moments, a woman in her 40s appeared, walking briskly toward Sarah with a composed but somewhat cautious expression. She wore the air of someone who had been in charge for years, someone who had seen it all. Double quotes, "Mrs. Thompson, I'm the branch manager. How can I help?" she asked, her voice polite but clearly trying to gauge the situation. Sarah's eyes were still fixed on the teller. the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "I was just treated with utter disrespect," Sarah began, her voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "My son's check was just shredded. And not just any check. That check was from Jamal Thompson, the CEO of your partner company. Do you know who that is?" The manager's eyes widened in surprise. She had been expecting a routine complaint, perhaps an issue with a miscommunication, or a mistake in processing. But this was different. Her mind quickly processed the name, and it dawned on her who Jamal Thompson was. The manager's face went pale as the realization hit her. This wasn't just any customer. This was the mother of one of the bank's most important clients, a client who had just been elevated to a position of influence within the bank. "I had no idea," the manager said, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. This is a complete oversight. I assure you, this is not how we conduct business. I will personally make sure this doesn't happen again." But Sarah, still reeling from the humiliation, wasn't convinced by the manager's words. This wasn't about money, nor was it about a simple mistake. The apology felt empty, almost as if the manager was just going through the motions. The issue wasn't just the money. It was about the treatment Sarah had received, the assumption that she was somehow less important than the people behind the scenes at the bank. "Sorry doesn't fix this," Sarah replied, her voice low but resolute. "I don't care about the money. I care about the way I was treated. My son has worked his entire life to build an empire, to become a partner with this bank. And this is how his mother is treated. No apology can undo that." The manager's face showed genuine concern now, but it was too late. Sarah had already been made to feel small, invisible in a place where she should have been treated with the utmost respect. Jamal wasn't just a client, he was the bank's newest partner. Someone who had worked hard to get to where he was. And yet, his mother was being brushed aside without even a moment's hesitation. "Please, Mrs. Thompson, let me make this right," the manager said, trying once more to ease the situation. "I'll take full responsibility for this. I'll personally make sure the check is replaced, and I'll ensure this doesn't happen again." But Sarah wasn't looking for compensation or even an apology. The damage had already been done. This wasn't just about the check, it was about the deep hurt of being dismissed by an institution that should have recognized her and her son's accomplishments. She had already witnessed how little respect her presence had been afforded. Now, in the face of this, Sarah realized that this incident would leave a lasting impact on her, one that no apology could undo. As she turned to leave, her mind was spinning. But she knew one thing for certain. This moment of disrespect would not define her. It would fuel her resolve to stand tall, to be heard, and to make sure that the next time anyone saw Jamal Thompson's name, they would understand exactly what he and his family stood for. The moment of reckoning had just begun. In the days that followed the incident, word spread like wildfire. The story of Sarah Thompson, the mother of a successful black CEO who was disrespected by a bank that had no idea who she was, became a viral sensation. Social media platforms exploded with reactions. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying the outrage over what had happened. People were enraged not just by the fact that Sarah had been humiliated, but by what it represented, a pattern of systemic disrespect toward black professionals and their families. For many, this was not just an isolated incident. It symbolized something much larger. It was about the way society often overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed people based on their race or status. It was about the subtle, often unnoticed ways in which people of color, particularly successful black individuals, were marginalized. The incident struck a chord with thousands of people who had experienced similar disrespect in different forms. They saw in Sarah's ordeal a reflection of their own struggles of being treated as invisible despite years of hard work and sacrifice. But amid all the outrage, Sarah's son, Jamal, was not about to let this slide. Despite his busy schedule as the CEO of a thriving tech company and a newly minted partner at the bank, he knew this was a battle he couldn't ignore. He could have taken the easy route, letting the incident fade into the background. He could have brushed it off as just another mistake. But Jamal wasn't that kind of person. He knew that to let this go unchallenged would send the wrong message, not only to his mother but to everyone who had been watching. Jamal's decision to act was both bold and unprecedented. He didn't just want to address the personal slight his mother had suffered. He wanted to use this moment as a catalyst for change, not just for his family, but for everyone who had ever been disrespected in the same way. So he took action, using his newfound platform as a partner at the very bank that had disrespected his mother. Jamal called for an emergency meeting with the bank's executives. He made it clear that this was no small matter. He wasn't interested in just a simple apology. What he wanted was accountability, transparency, and most importantly, a change in how the bank treated its clients, especially those from marginalized communities. Jamal knew that this was about more than just one woman's humiliation. It was about creating a culture of respect, one where every customer, no matter their background, would be treated with dignity. He didn't stop there. Jamal, recognizing the power of his platform, took to social media and made a public statement. In a viral video that quickly garnered millions of views, he spoke with passion and conviction. "People like my mother don't deserve to be treated like this," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "I worked hard for everything I have, and I'll make sure no one is disrespected in my name." The video resonated deeply with people across the globe. It was a call to action, a reminder that no one should ever be made to feel inferior or dismissed based on their race or background. Jamal's words struck a chord with those who had witnessed or experienced similar injustices, and they rallied behind him, offering their support. The power of social media amplified his message, and it became clear that this was no longer just a personal matter, it was a movement. In the wake of the video, the bank had no choice but to respond. Under intense public pressure, they issued a formal apology to Sarah Thompson, acknowledging the mistake and the disrespect she had faced. The apology, though necessary, felt somewhat hollow to many. The real change came when the bank took action beyond just words. The teller responsible for shredding the check was reassigned, and the bank pledged to implement new training protocols for their staff on diversity, inclusion, and customer respect. The executives acknowledged that this was not just an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper issue that needed to be addressed. But for Sarah, the aftermath wasn't just about the apology. It was about something more profound. She felt a deep sense of pride for her son. Jamal had taken control of the narrative, using his voice, his platform, and his influence to bring about real change. He had turned a painful moment of humiliation into an opportunity to elevate others, to show the world what it meant to stand up for what was right. As the public's attention shifted to the bank's handling of the situation, Sarah found herself overwhelmed with pride for what Jamal had accomplished. It wasn't just the apology or the reassignment of the teller, it was the shift in the broader conversation about respect and equality. Jamal had shown the world that no matter how successful you become, you must never forget where you came from or the people who helped you along the way. And just like that, the Thompson name became synonymous with resilience, power, and integrity. It was no longer just about Jamal's success as a CEO or his mother's hard work as a single parent. The Thompson name now represented something much greater, an unwavering commitment to justice, to equality, and to making sure that no one, no matter their background, would ever be treated as invisible again. The incident had brought Sarah and Jamal closer, but it had also solidified their place in the public eye as a family that had not only risen to the top but had used their platform to lift others up along the way. It was proof that no matter what life throws at you, you can always rise above it. You can use your power, your influence, and your voice to change the world for the better. And the Thompson family had just proven that they would not let anything stand in the way of their legacy. What do you think? Was it just a simple mistake, or was there something deeper behind it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories like this.